Hello all. Hello. Hello everyone. Uh, do you know, I have no idea what's going on, but it's just possible that someone out there is hearing me. Nicola, I can see a vague silhouette of you in the background. If you can hear me, can you wave your hand? I think I can see it. I'm gonna plow on in the assumption that someone can hear me somewhere. Uh, so anyway, my name's Richard Durant, and I am the Babcock advisor, Babcock LDP advisor for English. We are essentially Devon County Council's school improvement arm, but we are outsourced to Babcock International. Um, I've been working with schools for about 14 years now on literacy across the curriculum and English and various other matters, teaching and learning in general. Um, and I'm still really fixed on the idea of it would be great if we could actually get literacy off the curriculum, get it off the ground and going. I think that, to be honest, I think we're kind of on the tail end in some ways of the third literacy incarnation, the whole school literacy incarnation in my career. When I first started teaching back in the mid-80s, I remember there was this really pleasant bearded chap who was in the corner of the staff room, and he was completely hopeless. He had no control over his classes at all, but he was introduced to me as the literacy coordinator, and I was quite impressed, really. But I think he saw literacy as a hobby. It was something almost like a refuge from the real world, which was only too present in his classrooms. And at that time, it was really in the wake of the Bullock report into literacy, which had come out in the mid-70s. And Bullock was really a tremendous report. It was about how we need to have all teachers teachers of literacy. You know, if you're teaching in English, you're a teacher of English. And that gave rise to loads of literacy coordinators across the whole country in all schools. Unfortunately, they were rather like the literacy coordinator that I first met, that they were quickly sidelined and ineffective. It struck me that as time has gone on that actually the literacy coordinator's role is a completely thankless task, and I don't want to put you off, but it's one which, you know, is it comes and goes, and it doesn't leave that much of a mark. However, I think it could. I really think it could. I think it could if we put some things right. And the first thing is, it's absolutely essential that you are a literacy leader, not a coordinator. People can't coordinate. I mean, you coordinate something, it suggests that it's there already and it's going to run itself without you, and you're just kind of making it a bit more efficient, a bit more effective. The reality is that unless someone is actually proactively and really innovatively leading on literacy, it won't go anywhere. The literacy coordinator's role ought to be a literacy leader's role, but if you have that role, it is absolutely essential that you are located in what I call the vertical power structures of the school. That is, that schools are essentially hierarchical organisations. They generally work fairly well, but you have a head teacher, you have a leadership team below them, you have middle leaders. The danger is that that sort of pyramidal, vertical power structure, that things like literacy coordinators do not relate well to. And the real danger is that before long, they find they're not really part of it at all. And I think there they start to belong to the same sort of horizontal structures that some other people find themselves kind of estranged in, which is those people who are doing things like developing teaching and learning techniques, where they're kind of given their head to try to get people enthused about certain techniques. Actually, they run out of steam pretty soon too. It's really important that if you are a literacy leader, as I call it, you must be a leader and you must be answerable to someone. It's really, I mean, it's wonderful when you become a literacy coordinator and you find you have a sort of roving role, but it doesn't go very far. Make sure that you are answerable, make sure you're accountable, make sure that what you're doing makes a huge difference to the school, that someone in the power structures is keeping an eye out all the time for the effectiveness of what you're doing. In fact, I would say that although literacy across the curriculum is a long-term project, and it never really survives long enough to be a long-term project, but it is a long-term project, but despite that, actually, if your work is not going to contribute to the outcomes for the current Year 11 next summer, as much as it does for heads of English, heads of maths, actually it's not really important to the school. You've just got to not be marginalised. You've got to make a splash, and you've got to make sure that you make an impact on the things that really matter to those power structures of the school. So I haven't said anything about what literacy is or what you might do about it, but I think what I would say is that we're probably in the tail end of the third major wave of literacy coordination. And I don't want it to, well, I don't think I'll be around for a fourth time, but I would really love it to work this time. Okay. So something about me, I've done, as I said, I've done a lot of work around literacy across the curriculum in schools, and I've written a few books on it. I've written 2 guides for teachers, one leading reading, the other less good writing, and more recently, of course, I've written a student guide to literacy. And to be honest, I wrote that because it suddenly occurred to me that if we are on the tail end of a third literacy across the curriculum wave, and I didn't want to be around hoping for a fourth, then maybe what I should do is go straight over the heads of teachers and schools and deliver the power to improve literacy straight into the hands of students, and that's what I tried to do. And I hope that literacy across the curriculum, that literacy book guide for students, the student's guide to literacy in every subject, will help the students directly, but I'm hoping it'll help you because it will be a reference point for all your work around improving basic literacy with students. All those things, that's what I would call a sort of functional literacy thing, really, the sort of stuff which students need to be able to do in order to make progress in any subject. While I'm on that subject, it is really important that when you recruit staff, other teachers into a literacy initiative, that the way that you persuade them is that if they start to take on more responsibility for literacy, then the proof of the efficacy of that is not how students do well in English, how they do in English. It's actually how well they do in that teacher's subject. So if that teacher gives more effort to improving students' appropriate literacy skills, relevant literacy skills in, say, science, then actually the proof of that is that students should get better at science, simply because they will be able to use language for learning better, they'll make better progress, and they will be able to express themselves and show their learning and demonstrate their learning much better if they've got the language to do it in. So we judge the efficiency, the effectiveness of literacy across the curriculum by progress in subjects, not progress in English. Okay, so how can things go wrong? Well, I've outlined the way things have gone wrong in the past, and I think they're always in danger of going wrong. But to sum it up, there's no clout or status for literacy coordinators, and that makes it a very difficult role. Exciting, but very difficult. If you haven't got the clout, if you haven't got the status, you're constantly in a position of having to persuade people to give of their time as volunteers, almost contributing to the hobby that you're so enthusiastic about. And it isn't a hobby. You know, this literacy is absolutely essential, as Ofsted have just pointed out in their latest report on Key Stage 3, called, what is it called? It's called The Wasted Years, with a question mark. They point out in that report, it was only published last week, that literacy and numeracy continue to be a serious issue across the curriculum in secondary schools at Key Stage 3. So it's not a hobby, it's a really important thing, but without clout and status, the danger is that you'll be sidelined and it will become a hobby. So make sure you get some clout and status by locating yourself within the power structures of the school. Not in a nasty way, but be accountable and have some clout behind you. And so there's inadequate support. People often think, I'll appoint a literacy coordinator, they're good people, and I'll let them get ahead and give them their head and let them go ahead and do some stuff. And then they give inadequate support, because the logic of that sort of position is they don't really need it. They're experts already, or enthusiasts at least, and they'll be self-motivated and self-sustaining. And with that comes, of course, no challenge from above. Now, of course, literacy coordinators, quite rightly, rather like not having challenge from above. I mean, there's too much challenge in many ways in schools anyway. But without that challenge, again, there isn't the status. And of course, it all leads to isolation. So in the end, you find literacy coordinators seem to be doing less and less, and they lose the confidence to confront other people and to buttonhole them and try to get initiatives working. So the isolation is totally self-defeating in the end. So how can it go right? Well, you must recruit, not just on the basis of people who are enthusiasts. I think you must recruit. There are different ways of doing it. You can recruit whole departments, so that whole departments have to commit to particular sorts of literacy. And yes, you must do that. You can recruit what I call commandos, sort of a group of people who are very enthusiastic about literacy from right across the curriculum. You can do that. You can recruit representatives from departments, and there's a real strength to that, because then they become your advocates, or the advocates for literacy, back in their own department meetings. But even that is, the trouble is, when you recruit people into a sort of committee, they come along to the first one, they come along to the second one, but unless something really happens, they start to make excuses. They don't even know they are, but they have effectively deprioritized, and they're doing other things on those essential meetings. Recruit. Make sure that when you recruit people into any sort of group, that there's definite activity, there are expected outcomes, and you are able to begin to hold people to account. Get agreement on priorities. It's quite useful if in the early stages you can prioritize particular areas that the whole school can focus on. Okay, you might decide you're going to have a huge focus on full stops and capital letters. I wouldn't really recommend it, because people fixate on these things and they say, oh, they can't even do that yet. But the reality is they can do it. They're probably not doing it, or not doing it consistently. But a sort of total focus on fairly basic stuff is not necessarily the most inspiring way to go forward. You might, for example, though, focus on writing better sentences, sentences which are better chosen, better designed for circumstances, and that allows departments to make that work for themselves. For example, in science, they might decide that that means that they must teach the students how to write in the passive voice. And that might be a particular aspect of sentences they think is appropriate and they can concentrate on. Another area might be wanting to work particularly on varying the order of sentences using connectives at the front of sentences. Fine. Both of those would be still concentrating on improving sentences, and that might be a better way forward. Whatever you choose, though, try to get some agreement on it. Try to get staff to sign up for it. But people tend to go for the things which are their particular bugbears. And very often people will choose things which, yes, students are perhaps weak in, but on the other hand, if they improved hugely in that particular area, it still wouldn't make much difference to their progress in the subject. A very good example of this is the apostrophe, of course. I mean, there's almost no one in the country who is good at apostrophes. So you could prove that it's a real weakness amongst all your students and your staff, probably. But it wouldn't mean to say that it would actually benefit you by concentrating on it. But concentrating on weaknesses in sentence writing, grammar, if you like, is likely to have a big payoff. It's going to be challenging. It's going to be something which will improve students' expression. They'll be able to express themselves with more clarity and more appropriate emphasis. So that is likely to work. But that sort of thing is not the sort of thing which tends to crop up when you ask teachers about what they think are the most important things. There is a huge focus on spelling, punctuation, apostrophes, things like that, which, yeah, okay, they're important, but they may not be the most important, the most inspiring things to sort out. Get agreement on the priorities. Use a sort of grid where you say, okay, we want to identify the things which are weak, which students are weak in, typically weak in, but also are making a big impact, holding them back from success in their subjects. Focus on those two things to get the priorities right. When you've done that, try to get some priorities which will work perhaps in different ways, but can be shared by a number of departments, and focus everything on that for a period of time. Make sure that everyone is focusing on that and it is monitored. Monitoring can just be that people report back in a credible way, but monitor it. This is a step-by-step approach I'm going to suggest here. You've got your priority, and don't stick with it forever. I mean, even sticking with reliable use of commas or fronted adverbials might be useful, but not forever. So seek a new priority, but don't abandon the old one. Work on a step-by-step cumulative approach. So, you know, you're working on one thing, then you're working on something else, but you don't drop the first thing. You keep building up. Accountability, I've already said, is a really important thing. Make yourself accountable. Demand that you are held accountable. Make sure that your plan for literacy, the school has paid, in theory, the school has probably appointed you and at some expense. Make sure that your plan for literacy is located within the school's development plan. It doesn't mean to say it has to be copied word for word into it, but there needs to be part of that school development plan which is explicit about how your literacy work, how the school's literacy work is going to impact on improvement overall. And finally, just make sure all the time that you don't allow your literacy role to become a hobby. Make sure that you maintain strict professionalism. When you look at priorities for writing, I can think about reading and writing, but writing first of all, it is best if you generate those priorities with your colleagues. But objectively speaking, there are two big areas which are important for every student of every ability. They are the areas which, if they can be helped to get better in them, they will improve in their subject areas. And those two are, well, they're not punctuation. They're not apostrophes. There are a lot of things they're not, but the two big things are writing good sentences. That's the first thing, writing good sentences. And the second one is structuring and developing ideas. Perhaps it's the other way around, but it's structuring and developing ideas. Some people call it extended writing. So, I mean, actually, for some people, it just means equipping students to be able to effectively get all the marks in high tariff exam questions. PE papers, DT papers, I mean, let alone English, but DT, PE, they have a number of questions which require the students to structure their own answers and to get between 6 and 8 marks. Now, very many students, even able students, find that in the end they only acquire 2 of those marks because they weren't good at structuring their own answers. So I would say the 2 key areas to focus on, but don't lob these in and say these are the things we must focus on. The 2 key areas are writing good sentences, and secondly, structuring and developing ideas. I'd like to just read you something which is laughable, is ridiculous. But a few years ago, when I was seconded to a school, a boy was sent to my office because he'd got into a ruckus in the English area, and he'd been sent to me, and I was trying to work out what on earth had gone on, because it's so hard just to find out what goes on when you weren't there yourself, as you know. So in the end, I asked him to explain to me what it was that he'd been sent to me for, why, what had happened, and it made no sense at all. So I decided to make him sit down and write a report of what happened. Now, I would have been able to show this to you if it hadn't been for technical problems, but I'm going to just read it to you quickly. What he wrote in the end was this: lining up for music, I was out of line, so went to the back. Simon pushed me and I nearly fell down the stairs. I then kicked him and pushed him. Simon then got Josh and pushed him into me. His bag hit me and my head hit the building. I then kicked him again and punched him in the face. He then started crying and blamed everything on me. Mrs. Baxter came and Sally told Mrs. Baxter I punched him on Simon's left cheek. I didn't. I punched him on his right, not where the filling is. So I suddenly realised that the whole thing was about, he'd obviously been told that he mustn't punch this boy in the cheek where he recently had a filling, because that would be painful. But apparently it was okay to punch him in the other cheek. But it was fascinating. What fascinates me was that he was able to kind of summarise it, and although he was weak in literacy, he was able to write it in such a way which in some ways excused himself, but in other ways obviously could have been a lot more selective in the details he offered. And it again, not well organised, not well expressed actually, and wasn't very useful for the purpose, didn't fit his purpose well. I'd just like to say something about when you're working with teachers. Teachers will need training. Most teachers have been through quite a few literacy bits of training on and off, and most of them think that it's quite important now. But the biggest problem is that most teachers, I don't think, have the confidence to teach reading and writing. And leave aside speaking for a moment, but reading and writing, they don't really have the confidence to teach it. They do a bit of marking where they tell students where they went wrong. They occasionally explain how to set out a science experiment or a recipe, but they don't actually teach these things. And I guess it's because in most cases they just don't feel confident about it. Now, what's really important is that teachers model how to write something. And I always say, if you want students to write something, show them how to do it. Now, if you're going to show them how to do it, you need to know how to do it yourself. And I think very often, because we're experts in our own subject, we haven't consciously thought about what is involved in doing some writing. Now, modelling is very important because it allows us to think aloud and to show the students what it's like to think as a writer in science, as a writer in DT. And that allows the students to be let in on the secret of the decisions that writers, even at that level, have to make. So demonstrate it for students, model it, before you then bring them in to help you with the writing. And that gives you the chance to reflect back and feedback on what they're offering. And you hope they learn through that process. Very rare is it that I ever see a teacher modelling how to write. They'll show a model, they'll show something that was written earlier, they'll do the Blue Peter thing, here's one I made earlier. They'll explain, they'll mark and say where kids went wrong, but they almost never demonstrate in the way that people demonstrate other sorts of skills, like, for example, how to use a sander, or how to make some pastry. You wouldn't explain it, you'd show. And I think people are less willing to show when it comes to writing. Okay. Reading. Let's think about reading. Most important thing about reading. There are two areas which are really important in reading. And I think most people overlook these. One is students using the right strategy, the reading strategy. And by that I mean essentially students should be able to skim and scan. You skim when you just want to get the gist of something. So you cast your eyes over a piece of writing and you're just looking out to say, well, what's this actually about? Sometimes you do it because you want to know whether that piece of writing might be worth reading properly. And you skim over it in order to very efficiently work out quickly whether it's right for you. Is it even something you'd be able to understand? I mean, it might be on the right topic, but it's in a language which would be useless to you. So skimming is just getting the gist, the flavour of a piece of writing. Scanning is different. Scanning is where you know what you're looking for, you know the piece of information, for example, you're looking for, and you simply want to see if there's any extra detail about that in the text you're looking at. So you're usually simply skimming your eyes over the page, and I hate to use the word skimming with scanning, but you're glancing your eyes over the page and looking for key words usually. Now, these are key skills, and kids come from primary school with those skills mainly explicitly in place, and they know how to skim. They see it as a technical activity. They know how to scan, and they see that as a technical activity, and they use it. They use them. But if we don't reinforce it, then over time they regress to inefficient reading methods. Essentially, they regress to continuous reading, which is what people do when they're weak readers and unconfident. In other words, they just start at the start of a piece of writing and they just keep reading. Usually, of course, it means they keep reading until they give up, which could only be one paragraph in. But continuous reading is ludicrous in most circumstances in school. It's not ludicrous if you're reading a novel, but it's ludicrous in most cases. I mean, it is as ludicrous as if you were looking for Sandra Smith in a telephone book, and you decide simply to open the book at page 1 and work through until you got to Sandra Smith. Continuous reading is a daft way forward in most cases. It might be something you do. Continuous reading or close reading is something you do when you are sure, one, that you've skimmed text and it's the right text, and two, if you've scanned it for particular information and you now want to read in some detail what that information is when you found it. So, using the right strategy, skimming and scanning, is a really important aspect of equipping students for independent learning. Really good key objective for literacy. And the other area for reading is research skills. Now, actually, secondary schools, I think, probably never teach what I call finding out skills. I mean, it seems crazy, and I'm sure that teachers must think that they do, but there are models, there are sequences for equipping students with the means of using text or even visual text to find things out. And what students do at the moment is just awful. I've actually had kids in school now at this moment for 28 years continuously, and my last one, who's my 5th child, is in year 13 now. But I've had kids in secondary school for more than 20 years continuously, and it's still true that students come home occasionally with a homework like find out all you can about Stephen Hawking, or photosynthesis, or the Elizabethan theatre, or you know, any of these things. And it really is true. And I know how they were set as well, because I know I've done it myself. It's a Tuesday afternoon, and it's the last period, and the bell goes, and the kids run for the door, probably run for the buses, and it suddenly occurs to you that not only is tonight homework night for that class who are now escaping, but secondly, this is the very week that SLT are monitoring the books to find out if homeworks are being said. So quick as a flash, you put your head into the corridor and yell down the corridor after the final people are disappearing, find out all you can about whatever. And of course what they do is they go home, if they're at all conscientious, and they Google it. And then they kind of print just the first 28,000 references for economy's sake. But they don't learn anything, and it's just awful. There's a stepped model for research skills which I can tell you about another time, but essentially, you know, it's about deciding what your research is for, making sense of the question, the research question, making sure the research question is Google proof, knowing how to interact with text, knowing where to find information, making those smart decisions about where to go, knowing how to evaluate information in terms of not just relevance but credibility, trustworthiness, and then knowing how to represent that information usefully in a new form for a very particular purpose. Now, all that is not easy, but there are very, very specific ways of going about it, which once kids have internalized, again, empowers them as independent learners. I think the biggest bulwark against independent learning in our school classrooms is that students do not have a secure model for finding out. And so we can't trust them to do it. We have to tell them. Okay, so reading. 2 things: reading strategies, the right reading strategies, and research skills. So I think that's as much as I need to say at this moment. I've no idea whether you've heard any of it, but it's been great talking to you. So I'm going to say goodbye. Goodbye.